So much for coming. I'm so glad to see such a good crowd. These are the people in the room tonight who have a heart for people who are not as fortunate as us. We're very happy to see you. I thank Tim Wog for coming, our #1 volunteer on the streets doing outreach. And when I was in Thailand, they had the red shirts. Well, we have the blue shirts. Would everybody with a blue shirt please stand up? These are our volunteers. We are a small but mighty board. We get a lot done, but we could do none of it without our donors. Thank you, Dan Dow, for coming tonight. Thank you, Jimmy Paulding, for coming tonight. Thank you, Linnea, who's a longtime hero of mine, Linnea's Cafe. So we haven't found land yet. Hi, Tom. Thank you, Tom Brakovich, for coming. But we're making great progress. We've given 5,000 showers, thanks to Carly Creeth, who runs our shower program. We're in our 5th year. We have 10 volunteers from Hope's Village who go out on the street. Tim and Lisa Joey, where are you? We want to thank Monique Granada for coming. She is our designer. And I can't see in the audience, so I don't know who else to thank, but thank you all for coming. It means so much to us. Nick and Amy are one of our very best couple volunteers. They do showers. They have 3 children, and they bring their children with them. They're a dedicated couple showing their children how to help people with less than we have. But most of all tonight, I want to thank a very, how should I say, successful developer, and I won't give you numbers, but he is very successful in his tiny house villages, in co-housing, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Chuck Durrett.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Becky, for organizing this whole thing and trying to move us to the next step. Wow, we have a lot to cover tonight. You know, my specialty is making things happen. If somebody wants to do a tiny house village, then I try to make that happen. If somebody wants to do a co-housing community, then I make that happen. It just so happens that I've lucked out with that job description because I'm very happy with how many affordable multifamilies that I've designed. So far, 55 co-housing, including one in Oceano and Paso Robles. I came to San Luis Obispo in 1988. I graduated from Cal Polytech in '82 as an architect, and after the first book that I wrote called Co-Housing, and quite a crowd was there, and they started 2 co-housing communities and got them built. So, and there's a few people here that actually live in co-housing locally and around the state. But no time for chit chat. We got a lot to cover tonight. There we go. So this is my real specialty. Even with low-income housing projects, my #1 focus is making it work socially. The mantra in our office, the banner in our office for everybody to see is, if it doesn't work socially, why bother? I mean, first and foremost, how many relationships are built there on site and sustained there on site? How well do people know each other, care about each other, and support each other for years to come? That's a functioning neighborhood. That's basically a village. And I find it kind of strange that in America, we're not that familiar with village life. And I grew up in a small town of 325, so I grew up in a village, basically. So it was very easy for me to see as a kid, you know, strangers, or not strangers, nobody in that town was a strangers, but people that you wouldn't expect to help you get through college, helped you get through college, for example. And many, many, many hundreds of other things. It took me 2 blocks to walk to the grocery store on a Saturday morning because I had to say hello to Mrs. McDermott and Mr. Johnson and all these people that I knew and cared about. And that's a village. And if you look at this slide here, that was, oddly enough, that was in the year 2004. That was Neighborhood of the Year in the USA, which is kind of interesting to me. It was built. I was the architect and co-developer, but it's really those moms with those kids who made that project and make that project very successful. It's been built since about, I forget, 2003, I think it was, 2002 or 2003 that they moved in. And you know, rarely do business people, bankers, and bureaucrats as successful at making such successful neighborhoods. There are towns, though, now, like Auburn, California, that has decided that their next neighborhood has to be a high-functioning neighborhood. So they are actually donating a site to us, 4.6 acres, and saying, Chuck, make a project happen. And I'm so happy with how many counties and cities are stepping up and saying, let's make affordable housing that really works, not just to put a roof over people's head, but to make sure that the kids have a healthy environment, that the seniors have a healthy environment, that the parents have a supportive environment, and you know, that's what makes my life worth living. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about co-housing tonight, except you know, the things that I'm most known for these days is making homeless projects where community is the emphasis. I mean, I'm just astounded to what extent there's so much talent in those groups of people, so much ability if they're set up for success. And when they're set up for success, all of our society is set up for success. And when they're set up for failure, I think we're failing at so many levels as a larger community. And we also find that when we take the time to make a high-functioning community at that level, that neighborhood level, that 30 or 40 tiny houses, then the whole community benefits, the bigger community benefits at so many levels, whether it's financial or spiritual, in that they are simply happier and proud. You know, there's nothing to be proud about when you see people on the street. There's sleeping on the ground. I don't even know how you explain that to your daughter or your granddaughter. It's a problem for all of us. So I want to help set our society up for better luck there too. So anyway, let me crank along. I mean, I know that everybody here is very familiar with these images. I tried to take a few images out, so I'm going to go faster, but I couldn't because every one has meaning to me. And it has to do with the fact that this is not what we need to be doing. And we shouldn't be spending our resources on police having to manage homeless people. If you just look at the finances alone in the USA, it was recently, until a couple of years ago, it was considered to be standard, par, that every homeless person cost the town, the county, and the state $20,000 to $40,000 per person per year. There's tons of literature. About 20 different studies have been done. They've ranged from $20,000 to $40,000. Miami was the highest at $40,000 per person. With services, jail, hospital, mental health, police, fire, all the rest that goes into accommodating that need. However, in just literally the last few months, the number has changed from 30 to 50. 30 to 50 is the new number for how much it costs us as a society. Not to mention the emotional drag it is to feel that. Just driving around today and yesterday and seeing the homeless in San Luis Obispo, it made me a little nauseous, I gotta tell you. It made me feel like, oh my God, we can do so much better than this as a society. And what does it take? Will. That's the number one thing. I'm so amazed how often people will say, no, it's money. It's not money. Because if you do the math, you not only save money if you give them a place to stay, but you also you also create economic development in town. So it's become really conclusive that, but it's become fairly conclusive that it takes two things. It takes people who are very myopic on the social justice problem, and therefore the will. That alone should accomplish the will. But it also takes the business interest who are willing to do the bean counting to realize that this is just not wise from an economic point of view. We should be doing so much, we could be doing so much better than this. We could save so much money. You know, I forget what San Luis Obispo's yearly budget is, but I think it's like, you know, 300 million or something like that. A ton of that goes, 100 million go to cops. That's just a huge waste of money when it comes to dealing with homeless people. They have so many other things to do. And ambulances, and you know, you've all seen it. I saw two today. 2 cop cars dealing with a homeless person and an ambulance dealing with a homeless person. So it's just, we can do better than that. So, you know, where I live, they live in the woods, and that's since 1988, half of the forest fires in Northern California have been started by homeless people. That's a huge issue into our future, and it's our own fault. Not only did we mismanage the forest, but we leave people outside. And I noticed a free kitchen today, and they had all these things like, you know, the free food was things like a lot of pasta, I noticed, and a lot of beans, I noticed. Well, they got to cook their beans and their pasta somewhere. They got to start a fire somewhere, so we reap the consequences if it's not a house. A lot of camps. I've actually been doing a lot of work organizing camps like this. You know, it's so amazing when you wade into this camp and you talk to people, hey, what and where can we do things here that serves you as an individual, but we do it cooperatively? So whether it's picking up the litter, keeping the sound down, raking the pathway. I mean, everybody realizes that it takes 3 things, or you get 3 things from a community. One is a sense of identity, a positive sense of identity. Second is a sense of accountability. And I forget the third right quick, but I'll come back to it. So here's the little town I live in now, population 3,000, and there's another fire on Main Street, took 2 buildings down. A homeless guy got into an abandoned building and had to make his breakfast. And it's just, you know, one thing after another that this, in my view, pathology puts our whole society at risk, financially, even physically, and especially emotionally. I mean, it doesn't put us at risk emotionally. I think it's a very clear drag on the society when you're feeling like you're grappling with this problem all the time. And you see it, it's in our face all the time. You know, just some of these are from this town, like this one, and some of them aren't. So this is from San Luis Obispo, San Luis Obispo. And there's a key point I want to make tonight, a very key point. I know that these messes really annoy a lot of people. But you see this mess? That person that left this mess and that person that live in that little house are the exact same person. The difference is they don't leave messes anymore. Something happens when you're left out on the streets, and one of them is you become rather contemptuous and resentful of the larger society. I mean, after all, they cast you adrift. They've written you off at some basic level, so why should you care about them? And they don't. I mean, some of them do, but some of them don't. And that's the ones that we remember and dislike. In fact, there's a fairly healthy prejudice against homeless people now, generally speaking, because we're just annoyed by how much litter. We're trying to teach the rest of society, including children, not to litter. And why do the homeless people get to do this and walk on? You know, and over and over again. I run the community closet nearby, but I've realized it's just a glorified littering program, basically, because the stuff is just left everywhere after it gets wet, after a rainstorm, and so it's a problem. That person and that person is the same person. That's the key thing. It's a different person in this case, but it's the same person. And they have a little house, no matter how economical, and I'm going to try to show you some tiny houses built here today that go from free to way too much money. You know, my favorite project was built in Eugene, Oregon. I'll show that. It was built for $8,000, a tiny house, where the future residents played a key role in the construction and about 150 other volunteers. I'm so amazed by what extent a lot of people actually want to be part of the solution, like all of you here. And when there was the call to do, we did 30 tiny houses in the town I live in, and we built them over basically a month. 150 volunteers came out to help build these, including homeless people. So I'm amazed when you garner that energy, you can just make things happen. And as far as I'm concerned, the era of excuses is over. I mean, it's funny. We don't have land, we don't have money, we don't have this or that, and we do. We have all of those things, and we just misallocate the money. So this article here in the New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell really sums it up in 10 pages in the New Yorker, is how crazy it is that we're just not housing people as fast as we can. And the economic analysis is brilliant, because he's such a great writer. And one of the things he talks about at length is that these two curves. If you look at this curve here, this is the ability of homeless people from very low capabilities, usually mental health, maybe even addiction, to very capable. And he describes this hockey stick curve, as it's called, is these are the people who cost all the money. And they do cost a lot per person, per homeless person. And so some municipalities are just serving this population, because getting them off the street saves people who are spending weeks in emergency care at the hospital. People are spending months in jail because they just got too contemptuous, impulsive, and acted out aberrant behavior left and right. I'm very much of the school that you bring an even piece of this population along, because these people are the ones who make this whole community function, and function really well. A project I worked on in Eugene, Oregon, tiny houses, 8 by 8, 64 square feet, and no electricity, no plumbing, no water, no heat. And this group of people here help figure out how to get all 30 of them heat, water, plumbing, showers, laundry, bathrooms. Before that, they had porta potties that they, immediately out of the gate, they had porta potties that they took off site. They had water that they trucked on site, obviously shipped off the garbage. They got the, these people got the recycling organized, and they actually turned it into an income, of course. So I'm a big fan in making it obvious that every society needs very capable people, and some people that need to be brought along. And what's so interesting about this is that there's a lot of, all these homeless people under that blue curve are, basically have enough problems that they are homeless. Well, it's always largely that they don't have a support system. So what you're doing, introducing them into a high-functioning neighborhood, is you're giving them a support system. So let me continue. A project that I just finished, which the book is called A Solution to Homelessness in Your Town, was actually not right next to large suburbs. So one of the things that people say is that, well, nobody wants that in their neighborhood. I argue that if you can make it palpable, which in my view you can, that it's better citizens to have people in a house than not have them in a house, then you can actually make a case, which is what we did in this town here. We got a site that was extremely bad. I mean, it had 25 retaining walls on it, left over from a plan to make 17 McMansions on this site. Then the 2008-2009 crash happened. And these 6-foot-high retaining walls, that's an employee of mine, were a huge deficit. They had 28 architects before me, and none of them could figure out how to make this site happen. So I'm a huge fan of seriously sharp pencil feasibility studies, because that's what it takes. It was $2 million to get rid of the, It was $2 million to get rid of these retaining walls, for example. Then it was another $2 million to get rid of the underground drainage systems. So that project was not feasible until because it was next to that neighborhood, very, very serious neighborhood meetings that said, look, we want to be good neighbors. And this is the number of ways that we're going to be better neighbors than we ever were before. So that was really stellar. 28 solutions, actually, previously, had taken out the retaining walls, all of them, and had taken out all the underground drainage, all of them. So that was about a total of $4 million, making this project not feasible from an economic point of view. And so I started over from scratch and said, no, let's make a village. Let's just make an old-fashioned village that's very centripetal, where people have a relationship with each other, a face-to-face relationship to each other. I mean, I could never understand how people could have healthy relationships in a double-loaded corridor. I've never struck up a conversation with anybody in a double-loaded corridor in a hallway. It never seems to work. I mean, it's awkward, and you're inappropriate if you try. So for homeless people, these are just like little problematic scenes, really, so even if it's the easiest way to box people up, which is essentially an institution, I don't feel like it works. So I started over, and I started with a little setting, that was a little sketch that said, hey, let's make this a centripetal village with gardens, etc. This was one of my first sketches, and I'm talking to you guys as an architect because that's what I am. And I usually start projects like this very reminiscent of an ancient Chinese village, basically, where, in this case, you're marrying the structures with the topography. And in our case, we're marrying the structures with a social setting that makes sense. These guys in this ancient Chinese village have tons of relationships, obviously, because they farm together, they grew up together, and all the rest. So more preliminary sketches and more selling it to the city and to the neighbors, and why it's going to be better than a big setback strip commercial style institution. And here's how the little boxes, duplexes and triplexes laid out, 70 units, 450 square foot houses. This is, a further rendering, which we basically had to do to sell it to the neighbors. And, the big aha moment happened when these are the little units with here's the front door, little front porch, kitchen, dining, living, bedroom. And, I've done 4 projects for this nonprofit. And I think it was the second project, I was able to convince them that before that, we were just sort of boxing people up. And after the second project, I was able to describe them that 2 seniors, this is actually 55 and older, mostly veterans, 2 seniors sitting out here playing Scrabble is infinitely better than 2 seniors sitting in here watching TV. I mean, seniors in America watch TV about 6 hours a day. And in my opinion, people who are recovering for something, it's just another path. It's pathological to be watching that much TV. But they not only have a front yard, which is about 5 feet deep, and they have that much to landscape up front. They have a backyard that's about 5 feet deep. Maybe it's 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. Yeah, 6 feet. And a backyard. So they have community and they have privacy. And they can watch people walk by from the front of their house, which is a key thing that I believe in, because I live in a co-housing community, 34 houses. I never go over to somebody's house to knock on the door, but if I see somebody that I want to chat with walk by, I just knock on the window. There's so many tricks about stitching a community together, making it easy and natural and not self-conscious. Mostly we spend time on the phone saying, hey, can you go for a bicycle ride on Saturday morning? And Saturday morning rolls around, you don't want to. Same thing in these projects. So making it easy for the architecture to constantly facilitate community and privacy, not just privacy, but community and privacy. So lots of sketches for the city again, and a 4,000 square foot common house, which means that they don't only have a 450 square foot house, but there's a 4,000 square foot building that serves them together, all the things that they can do together that makes their own lives more practical, more convenient, more economical, more fun, more interesting, more healthy, etc. I mean, so a lot of these homeless people are learning how to use a computer here in the computer station. They have meals together. They have this is the veterans office. You know, they have 22 households of veterans. And so they have counselors here, and they have other various counselors here. So this is about housing with services. And the reason is that many of these people have been living outside for years. And there's nothing more effective at destroying the abilities of a person or even the soul of a person than leaving them sleeping on the ground. I mean, I can't imagine doing it for 1 week, much less years and years and years. So they have a lot of mental health, Alcoholics Anonymous, and all the things necessary to set these folks up for success so that they're not a drag on society. I got to tell you, this project was pretty unique because this woman here was the project manager, Abra Levine, and this happens to be the groundbreaking. You know, everybody was there to celebrate the groundbreaking. About 150 people came, and they had 16 funders in this project. Home Depot kicked in $50,000, all the way up to the county of Napa kicked in $2 million. And I've never seen an event where every funder came to the groundbreaking. The groundbreaking is usually pretty boring. It's, you know, a couple press people there to take a photograph, but everybody was giddy. It was just a party-like atmosphere for one reason and one reason only. There were all these people there that felt like they had played a role in the solution. They had felt like they were setting others up for success so that they could be set up for success, so that the larger community could be set up for success. So it was very unique in that way. And it also was very expensive, which I'm going to get back to, with 16 funders. Their whole approach, you know, this giddiness was catchy, and the whole approach was if we do something more expensive, which they wanted to do one thing after another, like make all the units handicap accessible and make them all solar energy, and they just went and found another funder, or they went back to the 16 funders and asked for more money, and everybody was so proud of what they were accomplishing that they wanted to be part of the solution. So that was fantastic. You know, it was very unique. Project was built. It was also a big training program. We had 20 framers, and only one of them had framed previously. So it was challenging at that level. Very challenging. But we pulled it off. And on a site that most people would have written off because we had a 56-foot drop from the top to the bottom, and we did a lumbar number 2 to make it solution. And of the other 28 architects, I think I was the first one to actually spend an evening on the site after dark. So I had to figure out how to get down one night from here, and it was obvious that I had to go this way. Or, I'm sorry about that. It was obvious that I had to go this way, you know, to get down the site. And so I said, okay, that's the solution. All handicap accessible, we're going to have Lumbar Street from the air. And it brings a lot of character to the table. I will say the only complaint that we ever had from the neighbors is they said to us at the grand opening that these houses are better than my house. And they lived in a big, 2,000 square foot house right next door. So I could see that that would be an issue. Anyway. The common building, as an ode to the veterans, it was basically 22 households, about 30 people altogether. I put in 3 soldiers at attention and 1 fallen comrade on the top of on the top there. And it was so interesting to me because somehow I managed to get that through. I never told a single person that I was going to do that. And they, just got built. And they said, "What's that?" And I finally said what it was because they couldn't erase it at that point. It's past erasure. So post-erasure. Anyway, and the vets office, who now has a full-time employee in that building, just think it's the bomb. The bomb. I'm just so happy with how people immediately, who had not, had been sleeping under bridges, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute, decided to, make their home a home. And of course, you can imagine at the grand opening how many teary eyes there were, not only with the people who were moving in, but all those people who are so happy to be part of the solution, especially when the grand opening was about a week after the residents were moving in. And it was just so astounding to what extent they were already personalizing these houses quite handsomely, I thought. And none of them are a mess. None of those houses are a mess, largely because in that setting, everybody does feel accountable. Sense of identity, sense of belonging, sense of accountability. Thank you. And for your patience on that one. Here's the common house, warm and giving, a little bit expensive, but a lot of donated materials. I donated the tiles on this fireplace that I took off of a roof myself. They're slate, and it was taken off of a roof in Berkeley, California, of a couple of Swedish carpenter had built this building in 1900, and so I got the slate donated to me, and we used it there, and we used a lot of donated materials. Whoops. Here's the house, kitchen, living. Sometimes people put a dining room right there, and whoops, I thought I had another interior. Whoops, hold on, ho-de-do. Yeah, there. No, that's a bedroom. Oh yeah, that's looking back from the kitchen. So that's coffee table, couch, back door, and then there's the bedroom, one bedroom. All the furniture was donated, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. And there's the kitchen. So this is the grand opening, and the guy speaking here, he was previously homeless, and he stood up at the microphone and he said, I got to tell you, when I saw my house the first time, I thought I had died and gone to heaven, and I plan to stay here until I do go to heaven. And that freeway that you drove in on, down, Highway 29? And then he stopped and paused, and then he said, I've been sleeping under that freeway for 6 years, and I'm a Vietnam vet. And that was the best I could do, was sleeping under that freeway. He's one of those guys who left all those messes previously because, you go off and fight in Vietnam to make that sacrifice, and then you get thrown out, to the outdoors. It doesn't do much to garner respect for the larger community. Not to mention, there's so many psychological theories about what's going on now, including the fact that if you judge a child, incessantly, day in and day out, I was just reading about ADHD the other day, and ADHD children are criticized 20,000 times before they're in the sixth grade. So if you judge somebody like that, they usually write off the family or even society. I mean, I hate to say it, but most people in jail have ADHD because they get impulsive and they're resentful about the fact they've been criticized all day. Well, I feel like the same thing is with homeless, where they're judged incessantly, and that breaks them down. I read a story recently, if you want to destroy a human being, make them homeless. It's the fastest way to destroy people because it just takes everything away from them at so many levels. Anyway, it was quite gratifying to see people move into that project. I was so funny because at the groundbreaking, we had no snacks, and we didn't think it was going to turn into a party. So we fixed that at the grand opening, and it was a party because everybody was just so happy that what we had accomplished. The consultants, of which I was the architect, that's my pickup right there, we were in charge, and I embraced this problem, of getting donations for these people who had no, all they brought with them was a wet sleeping bag, basically, or a broken tent. And so we all went around, and it was so easy to do, too. And the homeless people, they unloaded the truck. I mean, I'm a big believer in participation. In other words, anytime there's an opportunity to invite the people that are going to live there to be a part of the solution, that is a big plus because they get ownership soon, and it's emotional ownership. Largely, that's all it is, but that is the most important ownership. Just like all of us feel proud of our own house, they feel proud of their house when they feel an emotional ownership. So I backed up my pickup and I said, take it into the common house. And we loaded pickup load after pickup load in the common house. It was so amazing to see people take, pick out their salt and pepper shaker. As for those of you who've read the book, I mentioned this one woman who spent, 10 minutes picking out a salt and pepper shaker and walking it to her house up that hill. And meanwhile, I carried her box of other things, blankets and stuff, behind her, and she took the salt and pepper shaker, and we walked up to her house, and she put him in the middle of the card table, which was her dining table, and said, now I'm home. Now I have a place for my salt and pepper shaker. So amazing to see people who've been, the things that we all take for granted, like a salt and pepper shaker, it was so meaningful to her, and something else was really meaningful to other people in terms of what represents home. What represents home for some people was to be able to start gardening literally the day after we moved in. Me and a few of the consultants had built these garden sheds, and they were just, people had their fingers in the dirt the very first day. Another thing that I really love about that project is there's so many women who were homeless previously who had grandkids, but nobody was leaving the grandkids with them, because what, are you going to leave them out in a homeless camp somewhere? It doesn't happen. So I was very happy to hear how many grandmas said, finally I can be the grandma that I always wanted to be. The grandkids can come over, they can spend the night, they can spend time with me. They ran the site plan, they loved the Lombard Street. And I just thought, wow, this is a person who gets to be a whole person now because she has a roof over her head. And she has a sense of place that the kids feel comfortable leaving her kid with the grandma. And it's a lot different than if grandma just had a little tiny house in the back of a church or something, 2 or 3, where it's not a community and therefore people are not as accountable to each other. The accountability, the community is the main currency of consequence, I want to say. I mean, it's not passing money back and forth. The currency is deeds. I did this for you, you did this for me, and then all of a sudden you have a community. This woman on the left, she still has my phone number. She calls me all the time telling me how things are going there, which is good. I get caught up on the gossip that way. I'm very happy with when I go there, when I visit there. I built that trellis, for example. How much, with others, how much community is built there day after day. One relationship after another, one smile after another, 1 half hour together here and there. And all of a sudden, you feel like you're back in a village, as opposed to the weirdness, in my view, that happens in too many typical homeless settlements where people are suspicious of each other, don't trust each other. Usually it's with cause, and 1 or 2 personalities that are causing that. But anyway, it's amazing how that can be quite different. And how much time, all of a sudden, these guys, this, you don't see it there, but there's 2 people on that front porch. How much time they actually spend with each other on these front porches was huge to me. I mean, just huge. Whoops, sorry about that. Whoops, hello, whoa. Oh no, oh no. Oh no, okay, there you go. That's what I was gonna say. Again, that I could just walk around there and there would be 4 or 5 households that are communing with each other on the front porch, or maybe more. Everybody getting around. Here's, the 16 funders that they had, which is also listed right here. And I went to another project that somebody else had designed, and they had a different 16 funders. And the thing I like about this the most is they're unpredictable. They're just unpredictable when you ask, Wells Fargo Bank, who was not the bank on this project, and they kicked in, I think it was $500,000 or so. And, when people say, where do I get the money? Because in a case like this, which was an expensive project, I mean, it's almost like, of course you go this was work done with a nonprofit. That's a very important point to make, and nonprofit goes to the regular sources. But it's also really interesting to me how you can, I almost feel like you can open the yellow pages and start flipping through it and start, making the call. Because as I look through these things, it's like the water department in the local town had, donated a couple $100,000. And people that you would never expect to donate money that donated consequential money. As I mentioned before, there's, Home Depot there, for example. I'm just, and people go, well, maybe we should go back to them. No, you need to find the people in your town who want to be part of the solution. And that is a matter of starting a list of people who are used to giving, being, philanthropists, of course, and others who are making financial gain. Like the paint company that did this project, they donated us $5,000 because we were buying all the paint from them. So everybody played a role. I'm just going to show a few other projects, and then we can take questions after that. But this happens to be a 3-story building that a nonprofit bought in San Francisco. I turned it into, as an architect, I turned it into a 5-story Victorian, and it's really a stellar place. The homeless people make dinner for each other 6 nights a week. It's not like a regular shelter where there's professionals. I was really amazed visiting the shelter here locally yesterday. They have 35 what appears to be full-time employees. That's beautiful. You have to do that as a transitional thing, but I would much rather see situations where these homeless people are taking care of themselves. And I'm working with a lot of projects. For example, I'm writing a book about a project in Iceland where 45 of the residents there are diagnosed with medium autism or Down's syndrome. And like a lot of these projects, they just figure out that if one person can use the bus, and one person can shop, and one person can cook, and one person can clean up, you can manage a lot of the ADLs, the activities of daily living, without professional people having to do it necessarily. And then these people grow bonds together too. So there's nothing like cooking dinner for the whole building with a couple of other people to really start to secure the kind of community that you're looking to secure over time. They're the kind of relationships that they might have had once upon a time with their family. This is their new family, and they have to generate those now. But it's so easy to not let that happen, too. It's so easy to make a big codependency where, we'll do this for you, and we're just here to shelter you. That's not the way to do it, in my opinion. Basically, this happens to be in Los Angeles, a site. It's going to come down for Becky and others whether they can find a site. I'm so amazed around the country how people are finding these ridiculous sites, but turning them into amazing places. That is an old-fashioned village that the indigenous people might have lived like once upon a time, but not surrounded by asphalt. This place is built, actually, and it's quite an interesting little scene there. Talk about making do with residual properties. So this is where counties and cities are stepping up. They don't even necessarily imagine that this can happen. This is a big place where I feel like it is important to get architects involved because they can see the potential oftentimes that nobody else can see, and they can make the most banal situations good looking, which is key, absolutely key when you're trying to keep the neighbors and the city, make them proud, keep them on board, make them interested in helping you further, making you feel like you did them right too. So I can't speak to this enough. I mean, there was so much that I cared about, in the rehab of this building, but, very much in the making of these little cottages, that the neighbors would be proud to have this in their neighborhood as opposed to want to fight it from day one. And it was a very deliberate act. Nothing was accidental. It could have gotten stopped any time if one misstep, proved to the neighbors that you didn't have their interests in mind too. This is a project that I worked on in Eugene, Oregon, and I really like it because it's 30 tiny houses built with the future residents. A little industrial part of town, 1 acre that they have rented now from the city of Eugene, $1 a year for the last 9 years. It's about a mile from downtown, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to go through the logistics of how they can actually walk there, of course, but it's perfect. It's out of sight, out of mind. This is one of the early townhouse villages. Tiny house villages. I kind of think of it as a model project in some levels and not in other levels. But it was about 150 volunteers and all of the people who were getting the 30 units, almost all of them. There were people that were going to get one, but they ended up not moving in. So they were very much a part of the construction. They were very, very much a part of the Saturdays and Sundays where a lot of people from different churches showed up, a lot of other volunteers showed up. And it's so interesting. You can set up making these little houses so easy. You could do one in a weekend, basically. So all of a sudden they had a roof, and more importantly, they had a community. And this place is self-managed. 7 people on the board who live there. And they have had to kick out 3 people in the last 9 years. 3 guys that were abusing their girlfriends. All of the girlfriends says they were abused before they moved in, but now they have the choice of having a house or having safety without having a boyfriend in their case. So it was really, really essential to, I hate to say it, but set those women free. It's just a weird turn of phrase, but and they loved living there. Another thing that I think is very important, they've been there for 9 years. About half of the same people that moved in live there still. And I've heard nothing but fantastic stories about others transitioning out to permanent housing. And there's a lot of these kind of villages where people think, oh, they can only live there for a year or 2 years. It's only transitional. But too often that means transitioning from homeless to a tiny house to homeless. And I believe that duration is a big part of making a village. Villages are not, it's not just a word. It's not just a marketing term. It's a very sophisticated, complicated social structure that is relevant and essential to people living, a symbiotic life with their neighbors. And the fact that this woman had been there for the last 9 years made her feel like she belonged somewhere. And she certainly accounted to other people. And when she said she lived here at Opportunity Village, she took pride in that identity because they had done so many things themselves. It looked like a self-determining experience, and it was a self-determining experience. She had a lot to be proud of, actually. Whoops. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to ask you to read this stuff because it doesn't make sense. Sorry about that. These little canistogas, they are also self-built by the residents. I'm going to try to find a slide. Well, basically, whoops, darn it. I keep thinking it goes back with the same trigger. It doesn't. Okay, hold-do-do. It's going to get exciting here. Okay, this is as exciting as we get. The interesting thing, like so many towns, they wanted it either on trailers so that if it didn't work in the first year, which by the way, they only got an 8-to-1 vote the first year to have this yearly lease for $1. But we did it so that you could pick up these tiny houses with a forklift and take them away on a flatbed if it didn't work after the first year. We had to prove that it could be built and then it could be taken away if it didn't work. It's so interesting how you do have to work and you have to negotiate and you have to deal with the fears that people have as well as the aspirations that they have around, solving part of the problem here. Anyway, 9 years later, and by the way, the last 8 years, it's been 9-0 vote. In fact, the last time it was 9-0 for a 5-year lease. So they have actually had less police calls than the regular neighborhoods in town in Eugene, Oregon. They've had very few. They hired a security guard for the first year because they had to as part of their conditions with the city. Then they went to the city and said, we haven't had one police call the first year, and we don't need a security guard. We don't want the money to go to that. They rent these little tiny houses for about $30 a month, and they were $8,000 a piece to build. This is the project that had no water, no sewer, no electricity, no heat, and the residents, the can-do residents in this community figured out how to make all those things happen. There's a lot of people who argue housing first, and it is true. People can't be creative and thoughtful while they're sleeping outside. But I feel like in the context of community first, people will definitely get thoughtful, creative, energized, productive right off the bat because they want to help each other all the time. You see that? So they've made all of those things themselves: sewer, water, showers, laundry, you name it. They have it all now. There's another project. A good friend of mine developed that last project, and now he's on his fourth one now in Eugene. And this one is little tiny houses that, and again, here's the thing that you keep hearing people say: where's the money? In this case, all the labor was donated and all the materials were donated because this guy knows how to, I'm not going to say manipulate people, but I'm going to say he needs to help people see that the whole society needs these little tiny houses, and you can be part of the solution. So Eugene has a big architecture school as part of their university, and he invited all the architects in town and the students to actually pick one of these little lots and design and build per office. Each office built 30 units. So 30 different offices, each one built. So they got a little competition going on. Whoops, I forget, you guys don't see that one. I know the architect who designed that one, and that happens to be their common building, for example, but another architect designed that one, another architect designed that, and they built them. And if people wanted to come by and help, they would, and a lot of people joined them in. So it's amazing when it comes to good deeds, there's a snowball effect, there's a cascading effect where, hey, I just have to show up on Saturday morning with my hammer and a couple of, things, and I can be a part of this, and then all of a sudden they are. Or that you don't even have to bring a hammer. We have hammers. So I've been doing a lot of community organizing, as I mentioned, wading into these camps, and I'm just astounded by how useful people want to be, even in their camps. Also, I'm equally amazed. After 3 days of working in this camp in Eugene, I'm equally amazed by how hard it is to find people that will follow up and start to do community organizing. In fact, I'm amazed by how many people who say, what is that? What is community organizing? And for me, that means one thing, and this is what I do even with my nonprofit low-income housing projects, is I just go in and I have some events where we do something together. Usually I make dinner and everybody comes. And I just ask, what can you guys do together that will make your individual life better? What collectively might you do, no professionals of any kind, that would make your life better? And it's amazing the cascade of events that come to the table. Usually it's in the 15 to 20 range. Go for walks together, go to the grocery store together, do the landscaping together. All of a sudden, people start to imagine things that bring them together into a community. And it changes the nature, it changes the complexion. So I think it's a career to be aspired to, where you're. So this is that camp in Eugene. And one of the reasons I got involved is because there was so much acrimony between the camp and the neighbors. These people had spent $390,000 for their houses, and they were afraid that they were going down to $290,000 because of this homeless camp that was there. And maybe it would, actually. So we got to set the homeless people up for success so that it sets the whole neighborhood up for success. And it made a huge difference once they started getting organized. We've been designing a ton of tiny houses lately, and I'm not going to go into it, but they look more like this. And in the end of the day, they have to be handsome. I mean, maybe that's the architect in me speaking, but I think it's also, that everybody wants to embellish their neighborhood and not deride their neighborhood. So, and I wanted to say I went to a conference in San Francisco, an 8-hour gig in San Francisco. 300 people were invited, 300 homeless specialists from around the state. I was a speaker. I was one of the 10 speakers. And at the end of the 7 hours, then we broke up into small groups to try to figure out what would be the number one thing, what would be the lowest hanging fruit that we would accomplish to make houses tomorrow. How would we start making houses tomorrow? And, finding a site and doing tiny houses. That would be the immediate solution. I'm sorry that this slide is not very vivid, but this is the actual document. This was a whole document that we came out with after 8 hours. The short term would be to build tiny houses immediately. And the long term would be to agreements with the cities, developers, exit strategies to getting into transitional housing. But basically what happens too often is people get hung up on the long-term solution and they don't attack the short-term solution. Finding a site, putting some little boxes on it, getting people off the street, getting them into a community, making it happen, getting them services if you need to. That tiny house village I showed you in Eugene, we put a big yurt on the site right off the bat. They could have a phone number, they could have an address. Half the people had a social security check that they couldn't get previously because they didn't have an address. There's so much of a watershed that comes with a place, a sense of place emotionally and a place physically. It's not that complicated. A lot of people drill down into the paperwork involved. FEMA, if you look on their webpage, this is what was a watershed in the county I live in, where we've done 5 major institutions in the last, less than 10 years. But in FEMA, if you look at their literature, it says there's only 2 things it takes to make an emergency. The definition of an emergency is the risk of people sleeping outside and the risk of being deleterious to local businesses. And that's, really true. I mentioned it earlier, and I really want to emphasize it's a partnership between people who see the social justice problem and the people who see the economic problem. And frankly, it takes both parties to make these things happen. You can't get it done. Doesn't seem like you can get it done. If you leave it up to free enterprise, people keep saying, the visible hand will take care of it. Well, I don't see them doing it. And I know too many people who have the heart of gold and can't get it done either. So it's a big, important partnership. I don't know, a friend of mine did this sketch, so I had to show it. It's beleaguering. And then another path of least resistance that I've been employing a lot is getting a lease agreement from stationery store locally and putting it on the table of the city, putting it on the table of the county when you see a site like those sliver sites that I was showing you earlier. You guys aren't doing anything with that site? State of California is making sites available too. And then just putting that lease on the table, showing up at City Hall with 50 people and saying, look, we need somebody to sign this lease so we can get on with it. And we'll make it so that they can be moved in the first year if they have to be. If you insist, we'll make that possible. But we need to get on with this. There's the time of excuses is over. We know the path of least resistance now. I drove around with Becky the last couple days, found plenty of sites that would be perfect, absolutely perfect in San Luis Obispo and San Luis Obispo County for making a little village on it. And it would actually help the town economically. It would help some neighborhoods economically if there's tenuous, viable. I mean, I did a project up in Vancouver a couple years ago, and what was so essential was that 33-unit project was made a very tenuous neighborhood center viable now. It would play a big role in the economics of that. And the key thing I want to mention is that in the context of a community, people are telling each other, hey, we've all agreed, we've all sat in a meeting with the neighbors and said we won't leave litter. If that's not happening now, which it rarely does, because people are just cast adrift, then you can't hope for that. But if you have one of your peers walk up to you and say, we've all agreed that we're not littering the neighborhood at all, then it changes the nature of the problem, basically, and people get on board. But it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do that with what amounts to an obvious cohesive community. It's super obvious. One thing, I live in this little town I mentioned of 3,000 people. We had a presentation like this. We had about 300 people show up, and this happens to be my office. And immediately a couple of committees got together. So I want to invite people to think about joining one of the committees that hopefully Becky convenes. I'm actually hoping to convene one tonight at the Granada Hotel and have some mint juleps or something. And basically just talk about the next steps. And I was, so amazingly happy with these little committees that got together that I was a part of or I wasn't a part of, but this guy became a major donor. He made one of the 5 projects happen almost by himself. And it's so interesting to me when you get the ball rolling locally, how the energy and the interest compounds to the point that you can make things happen. It's not as complicated. This is one of the little committees that I was helping with one night, but otherwise I wasn't on the committees. And locally we had a little continuation school, but it wasn't. These are kids 18 to 25 who were in a trade school, 25 students. Half of them were homeless, which was interesting. And so I designed up these little tiny houses that were basically built for free, because this was built at a trade school, basically, something that we all know is lacking these days. They built them and they got them distributed to their students who were homeless, basically. And when people start to see it, this woman lives right around the block from me in this little forest. She did until she got a little accommodation locally. She was up here for probably 10 years, believe it or not. She's here getting water out of the stream. And I just find that when you get involved with these people personally and you're involved with making a community happen, it really inspires you. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do it now. It's so easy to drive past them. It's so easy to walk past them. So, and however, I will say that once you start creating services for them, whether it's laundry or anything, for example, I drove around and helped people get their sleeping bags to the dryer so that after a rain. It's very easy to get bogged down and not make a tiny village. So there's a balance between providing services and getting them into a village so that they can take care of themselves 100% after that. So I'm just going to mention this little project that I've been working on within Iceland, where they actually they have an economic component on site. And I'm just going to bring this up. This is sort of advanced Homeless Project 201, but it's so amazing to me that they make a lot of their money. They employ people right there on site, 45 people that have autism in the mid to high range. And again, it comes back to if somebody can shop and somebody can cook and somebody can use the bus, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's their, they make it so they break it down. This happens to be candles in my house that I bought there that they made, basically, and they're very nice candles. So many things just require a lot of labor. They actually have huge greenhouses on this project, and these people would all be homeless, which means they'd all be dead, because so many people would be. Oh, I had another slide. I must have taken it out at the last minute. Whoops. Where there's an 83-year-old guy and an 85-year-old guy who live in that project, and they would both definitely be dead if they were stuck outside. The average homeless person in America dies at 49 years old. That's a 30-year death sentence. So I think we all know we can do better than that. Anyway, and I also want to say that bookstores have a key role in this culture change of how we deal with things. And I was so proud of The Parable locally, which is carrying the book. Volumes of Pleasure and Barnes & Noble. Really amazing that there's so many quality bookstores in town, and Barnes & Noble, who's not, they're a franchise, but maybe it's owned locally. But anyway, they stepped up and bought some books. So if you want to get a copy of the book, but you don't want to get it tonight, you can get them there. And I just told them I would advertise their scene because I really believe in bookstores and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, that was it. Thank you, guys.
Jason, thank you. So yeah, we're collecting questions on cards so that we can be more efficient in trying to answer the most common ones and the main themes and organize. And we will share what we don't get to tonight. email to everybody who signed up. So do make sure if you came in late or didn't stop off, check that you're here or sign in on over there. We'll also have some of Chuck's books out front tonight. And make sure not to miss the basket at the back, the opportunity to donate to make Hope's Village a reality. And T-shirts are available for donations to Hope's Village. Those excellent blue shirts that only the best volunteers have tonight.
So the key thing is if we don't get to your question tonight, we will answer them all on email, for sure.
Okay, we'll sort them. So how do you overcome local resistance? And Tim Wagg asked you this on the Dave Congleton show, apparently.
Yeah, this is a pretty common question, and it's real. I mean, of course, everybody's afraid.
Dave said there's not a groundswell of support here in SLO?
Well, there is. You guys are the groundswell of support. Thank you for coming.
Okay.
I mean, you guys show that I think that the paradigm can be shifted. And the thing about neighborhood opposition, it's real, of course. And getting them on board is key. And there's a variety of ways of doing it. And one is letting people know about neighborhood meetings that you're doing. And then having people show up. I'll tell you the quintessential story was in San Francisco, that 5-story building. That's right at the foot of what's the most expensive part of San Francisco? Pacific Heights. Right at the foot of Pacific Heights. You know, where Feinstein lives and everybody lives up there who's got Bloomberg and lots of money. And we had 26 people come to the first public hearing and literally pounded the podium. Over my dead body is this project going to be built. So the first thing I did was, it so happens that project was so cool because the nonprofit that we were doing that affordable project for, that nonprofit let me get all the future residents organized before we put any pencil to paper, basically, so that I could understand, you know, their story. I haven't been homeless. I don't know their story, so I wanted to know their story. And I took my book at that time. My prevalent book about community was called Co-Housing, and I expected to bring it up at the very first meeting with all the future residents. And the very first thing that one of the future residents said is, you know what, Chuck, this place has to have community. I've been watching the back of my friends for years. They've been watching my back, watching my stuff, et cetera. And it has to have community. And one person after another brought that up, community, community, community. So they got it. They knew that was the secret to survival. And so we did. And I didn't even bring out my book at all that night. You know, just stayed over there. But anyway, the first public hearing, we had 26 people who said no. And the head of the, they continued the hearing. And the next day, I took all the key 10 people that were going to help me do neighborhood organizing, took them to a thrift store, and I bought 6 or 7 camel hair coats, and I had a budget. And bought some nice dresses and got everybody dressed up, really nice shoes and stuff like that. And we went door to door and just said, hey, we want to be your neighbor. This is the bad luck I've had. You know, I was a realtor. One guy, I was a realtor, and the recession hit, and I was out of a job. And 2 weeks later, I was out of a house. And I just need a place to stay, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, I want to be your neighbor, and I want to be your good neighbor, and we plan to be good neighbors. We already have a sense of community because we've been working on this project for about a year, and we've already have all these agreements with each other, and we definitely plan to be not only, you know, healthy ambassadors to it's called the East-West House, but we plan to make you guys proud. We don't plan to, in any way, shape, or form, you know, be deleterious to this neighborhood. Anyway, the very next public hearing, we had 6 people who got up to the podium, pounding the table, saying, over my dead body. And the head of the planning commission, I forget her name, she's a big deal in San Francisco, Sue something. And she said, you know what? I couldn't live with 26, but I can live with 6. And so the project was approved. You know, the big bother with that, I got to tell you, I mean, as positive as that was being approved, I was pretty crestfallen by her comment because it makes me know for sure, I already knew this, but it makes me know for sure that land use is mobocracy, basically. It is basically who gets up there and pounds the podium the hardest one way or the other. That's one of the reasons I've very much embraced co-housing, because in co-housing projects, all the residents are involved, and you can't get real cultural shift towards the positive unless the future residents involved in development. That's my bottom line as an architect, working for 40 years now, designing for nonprofits, private developers, co-housing groups. It's the co-housing group every time that makes the buildings more energy efficient, that makes the project not so car dependent, that makes the project more community-esque and supportive. I had a project recently where a guy who grew up in Grass Valley, California, told me, hey, Chuck, for 20 years, I lived in a single-family house, and I bought 5 to 6 tanks of gas a month. And now for the last 5 years, I buy less than 1 tank of gas a month. So, that's the kind of stuff that makes me feel proud. And it all had to do with the community. They carpooled together, the community relationships they had were on site, so they didn't have to drive everywhere. There's so many things about that translates to homeless projects because they might not even have cars, so they completely depend on people to drive them to the store, to the pharmacy, to the doctor, et cetera, which happens, like at Valley View, the project on the cover of the book, that there's only less than a quarter of the people there own cars, and they completely depend on each other, and that codependency is what can build a community, because you have to be on your best behavior all the time when you're asking people for things, and you're asking everybody for something. Eventually, you're always on your best behavior, otherwise you're persona non grata. I could talk to that question all day, but the key thing I want to say about helping the neighbors see the possibilities is it has to have a dead clear plan, how you plan to make them proud. It's not going to happen because you think you're doing the right thing. It's going to happen because you've helped them see that that's a good idea for our town. Okay, thank you.
Tell us about the sites you located in our county. Details, please. We don't really want to say a lot about the sites that we found because we don't want to jinx them. But we're going to put offers in. Hope's Village is going to put offers in on county sites and privately owned sites, at least 4 or 5 of them, so stay tuned. Thanks to this guy. He's the one that drove around with me yesterday, and who owns that? Whose is this? And there's so much land in this town. There's so much opportunity. And before I forget again, I wanted to thank Raines and his wife Betsy for coming. They drove Chuck down. And Tim Wog asks, how do you overcome local resistance? Dave Congleton said that in San Luis, there is not a groundswell.
We started with that, yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't hear it. Anyway, there's very much a groundswell. Look at all you hear tonight. Everybody wants to do something about homelessness. And it's not rocket science. People need housing, and we can provide that housing. They need a hand up and not a hand out. What is this range of costs per unit, and what are the annual operating costs for a 30 to 40 unit village, and who pays for this?
Well, the projects I showed went from 0 to a couple $100,000 a house. If you do a project in the state of California that is sponsored by a nonprofit, which you end up doing, most of the projects like that eventually, there are costs around, one thing or another. For example, if the state of California gives you any money, you have to make all the units handicap accessible, which costs a little bit more, especially when you're doing it on a site with a 56-foot drop. But and yet, what I'm most proud of is when you get volunteers making things. I'm just astounded by how many people show up for these work weekends. Like, you guys over there, you're going to build this wall. You guys are going to build this wall. Here's the plans. Here's the jig. You know, you're going to stand there and drill things, and you're going to stand there and hammer things. And before you know it, you're making, 8x8 tiny houses. Geez. So the volunteerism is the way to get the job done, basically, because you can have a lot less regulations involved. But I also want to say that, for example, that most expensive project, that had to do with the fact that we had 16 funders, which each one with about 10 board members, so that we had about 160 board members that we had to please. And each one wanted a little bit more of this and a little bit, one wanted all solar panels, and so we did that. But of course, that cost extra money. Well, that's okay in that case, because they just went to that board. Well, it turns out that's going to be, another 100,000. Okay, well, that board kicked in that money. So went and found that money, getting all those board members, 160 people, to go find those couple $1 million or several $1 million is key. There's a lot of ways to find money, and there's a lot of ways to help organize volunteers. So really what you need to do, in my opinion, is the project is successful, but you just have to imagine that you're going to solve it, basically. That's the beginning of the solution, is you go, we can do this. We're just going to do this. We're going to find a way to do this. I forget, Natalie, I think she was the principal of that school that said, Chuck, I've got 25 students, half of them are homeless, and it's a trade school, for crying out loud. So, we're going to build our own tiny houses and teach people to be carpenters and all the rest. So, here, I think you guys have still have an architecture department here, and, rated 1 or 2 or 3. And, do a little competition. The Cal Poly sends a bunch of different kinds of, eco-groovy, very solar groovy little tiny houses to Washington, D.C. every year. If you can have money to do that, because it's part of a big national competition amongst architecture schools, if you have the money to do that, somebody decided to make a case for that's the good idea. Build a tiny house, make it super groovy from an energy point of view, and send it to Washington, D.C. That costs money. So somebody needs to make the case locally that, you know what? We got people sleeping on the ground. That's where we need to put our energy. And, in that case, I don't know if they're going to be building the tiny houses, or they'll be leading the crews. Cal Poly, learn by doing. I went there. The first time I was in Sunset Magazine was something I built in Poly Canyon. And, there's a lot of energy there for people to learn and do the right thing. And I think that's where you start, basically, because it's a lot of pin-up energy and a lot of desire to be part of the solution, I think. I don't know who asked that question, but.
Another question we have was, do you have villages with opportunity for people to have their own businesses? Absolutely. We're going to have micro enterprises, small businesses all over our village. Everybody's going to work in the village. No one's going to get to sit around and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. Everyone's going to be useful, and everyone's going to work. And there's so much talent on the streets. Right here in our own town, there's so many people that have so much good knowledge and expertise, and we need to bring that in. We need to bring them home and get them into housing with a roof and a door that closes and somewhere to put their goods. And we can do it. It's not rocket science. We can do this.
It's just not practical to leave all those people on the streets. I mean, when I look at that, I just see, look at all that humanity left on the table. All that potential skill and knowledge just left on the table. It's just not good choice of resources. Human mind is phenomenal. So get it doing things, positive things.
This one says, what are the qualifications for people to receive a house? Do they have to qualify for a loan? Is there a lot of red tape? No, these tiny houses that we're going to build will be built by the villagers themselves, with the community, with our retired contractors and architects and cement guys and sheetrockers, and we're all going to come together and build tiny houses. And they won't own them because we don't want a landlord rentee situation, we want a program fee, like Dan charges his people at Sunny Acres. It works real well, and if people get to build their own little tiny home, they'll have buy-in, they'll feel good about it, and we just need to get it going. And I'm really excited about the sites we found. He's got 10 up on the board, but we're gonna put offers in on at least 5 of them. So I'm really excited, and this would have never happened without this guy. You know how long I've been looking, or we've been looking. Do the homeless have to pay for the housing? How are the homeless selected to apply to get a house? They're gonna pay probably 25, 30% of their income. If they have no income, we'll put them to work. They can work on-site, they can work off-site. A couple of the sites we've had have real good businesses going next door, like the brand new $15 million animal shelter. Our people could go over there and walk dogs or, help out, volunteer. There's a million things for people to do in this town. We just have to bring them in, bring them home. How are the people selected for the village? The people that will come into the village are people we all know. We've been operating showers for 5 years. We know these people. We want to bring people in who we know will be successful. They'll be on a 30-day probationary period. If they don't fit in, there's 20 more behind them that want to come. We want to build a model, sustainable community village with at least 50 people in the very first village that can be replicated all over the county. When we get those 50 people in, it'll save the taxpayers $2 million on an annual basis. So this isn't a money maker, it's a money saver. How do you avoid or plan for the potential of a lack of community obligation among the people who live in co-housing? That one's for you.
In co-housing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an ongoing thing at some level. Gives us something to talk about. Oh, yeah.
Mike.
I say it's an ongoing thing, gives us something to talk about. I guess it comes back to the village thing. I hate to overuse that word, but, I live in a 34-unit co-housing with about 55 adults, about 25 kids. And, there's a lot of slack on the people with a couple, 3 kids. We don't, they don't do as much work as the rest of us. And there's a lot of slack on the 85-year-old guy who's got cancer and Parkinson's. But all the people that want to get out there and, get a workout on a Saturday morning, we all get out there and get a workout on a Saturday morning. And whether it's, cutting some trees down or doing some landscaping of one kind or another. Next weekend, we have to refinish the tables in the common house. I'm looking forward to that. It's all part and parcel of making relationships and communities. So, and I don't say that from a Pollyanna point of view, or even like there's some commune kind of association. I say that because I know what a functioning neighborhood looks like, and it looks like people knowing each other, caring about each other, and supporting each other. And that's not that hard to do, but you do have to make conscious decisions to accomplish it.
Chuck said the other day that we need more community at our little shower program, but Carly will tell you, where are you, that she very much has community at her shower program. People come, it's a pop-up care center, they can get a hot shower and meals and food and clothing and get their nails clipped by an RN when she's there, get a haircut.
Something about our showers is that when we first started, people were always at each other. Even in the creek, everywhere they were. They come to the showers, it's family.
And they get along and they talk and they relax, but they also help set up the whole thing. They break down the whole thing. They fold the towels, they clean the showers. So it's very much a community effort, and it's amazing to watch. It's just, people come out of there just feeling so much better than when they went in. How many villages do you think San Luis needs? Well, let me tell you. I'd say, if we can put 50 people in one village, we're doing well. But I want to thank Dan Dow and the county and everybody who had a part in opening up what we call the Kansas Avenue Village. There are 60 spots out there for RVs and cars. They're going to add another 15 spots. We're just delighted with this. They're making progress. They got good showers out there. They got good honey huts out there. They're bringing in food, and there's clothing, and we couldn't be happier. So thank you.
People living there are happy.
Pardon?
People living there are not happy.
Who said that?
Myself, a volunteer on the site.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. You don't have to be there, you know. There's 20 people right behind you that you don't want to. Do you live out there?
No, I'm a volunteer on the site. I know most of the folks there.
And what is your name?
My name's Paul.
What's your last name, Paul? Well, it does when you're criticizing something that I'm trying to be really happy about. We asked for a long time for this. No, that's all right. Absolutely. Go for it.
My name is Tim Mogg, and I'm a homeless advocate, and I'm out at Kansas Village typically twice a week, and I bring out food and other items, but I also walk the camp for 2 hours and talk to all the people. And one of the questions I do ask them is being here at Kansas Village better than where you were before? And there's been 100% yeses. So, of course, is it not perfect? Yes, it's not a perfect thing. It was done by the county without a lot of advanced planning. But for me, it's an upgrade. Literally every person who lives out there and has told me that being there is a far better place to be than wherever they came from.
Yeah, we're very grateful. We have a lot of people out there living in their cars, and this is what they can afford, and we're going to see a lot more of it until we become more proactive and make places for these people to go. Santa Barbara has had 26 safe parking spots for years and years and years, and they do real well, but they're just nighttime. So we're real happy about Kansas Avenue being a 24/7. At first they wanted to make it interim, you know, what do you call it, a trial basis of 3 months and then 6 months, and now they're saying they're going to find 2 more sites, and it just makes sense. You don't want people driving around, wasting their precious gas, going from here to there, so we're very happy. You mentioned that lack of support contributes to homelessness. To buy tiny villages, tiny home villages help prevent future homelessness. If so, how?
Well, yeah, I said that a lot of people are homeless because of lack of support. I mean, you know, I think that everybody knows that if all of us have a crisis of one kind or another eventually. And there's nothing like a family, normally, to play a big role in keeping that from turning into a lifelong tragedy of one kind or another. You know, the way that we're so mobile as a society, et cetera, sometimes separates people from their family, and then all of a sudden when they have a crisis of one kind or another, it turns into a precipitating event, and all of a sudden they're homeless, and for a duration of consequence sometimes. So, and do I think that community would be the question? In my opinion, helps prevent homelessness. I would say absolutely, because and whether. I mean, normal community, i.e. high-functioning neighborhoods, normally, plays a big role. However, there's also church communities and all the rest that play a role in supporting each other. In other words, hey, Joe, I mean, for example, in 2008 and 2009, you know, the economic recession was of consequence. So we had probably 5 people in our community who became unemployed all of a sudden. And, you know, the handyman in particular, he just became employed on site. But everybody in the community found a way to prop up the other 4 as well. The handyman was obvious, you know, and easy. Everybody, I had him painting, you know, stuff and fixing stuff. And because 54 other people knew him and knew what his capabilities were and trusted him, he was employed. And the same is true for the other 4 or 5 people that, hey, I know that they're hiring somebody over here, and I know they're hiring somebody over there. It was a big downturn. And it might have been happening to your neighbors in a non-community-like setting, and you might not even know, other than the fact that there's a for sale sign up on their front door, in short order. So I think community is a watershed. I mean, it's not family necessarily at all, but it can help, it can help substitute for some of that support. And, the choices are, you either have family or community, or you have the government doing stuff for you. In our county, I'm very familiar with what the government does because I'm pretty involved with it, but also, I was involved especially with a lot with the senior services locally. But, we have 50,000 people in western Nevada County. We have about 2,000 people that take, 2,000 or 3,000, but I think it's around 2, take advantage of what's called telecommute, or not telecommute, it's trans-tele, whatever, it's the bus. There's a bus service that will take any and every senior to wherever they want to go. So if they have to go to the pharmacy, they have to go to the doctor, they want to go to a friend's house. It's 2,000 people who get about 3,000 trips a year total. 3,000 seniors have it turns out to be about 30 trips a year, so it turns out to be about 60,000 trips total. It costs our western Nevada County about $1 million a year. Well, that's just one of hundreds and hundreds of services. And for seniors, for mentally ill, for children, you name it. And we've, in 18 years of living in this co-housing community, we have never had telecare show up once. Not once. Teletrans, whatever it is. They've not shown up once. The community members take them to wherever they have to go, and that helps bond people together too. So anyway, I could go on, I could write a whole book about how they save so much money. Luckily, in the context of homeless people, the different cities have written those reports. There's been about 20 now of very detailed budgets that showed that the average homeless person is costing about now $30,000 to $50,000 a year. That one article that Malcolm Gladwell wrote, he describes a person that's very famous in Northern California and Nevada. His name is $1 Million Murray. And they have actually counted how much money he has cost in city services alone. Police, jail, medical, and it was over $1 million for one homeless guy. So we can do so much better than that. Just a waste
Okay,
of
the
money.
next question is, do the very small, tiny homes have bath or kitchen facilities, living or sleeping? Our first model village will be a common house in the middle with a commercial kitchen and loos and a laundry room and meeting rooms and a barbecue out front, and then all the tiny homes around it. We do not want people going to their tiny homes and staying there. We want them to come in, have community, eat with their fellow villagers, work, whatever they're going to do. People will take turns doing chores. So no, they won't. If the county will allow us to make these little bedrooms, then that's what we'll do. We don't want people to get too comfortable. If they can move on, we want them to move on. If they want to, stay for a while and then leave, but some of them will never leave. You all see the guy downtown who walks up and down the streets yelling. He's never going to have a job. He's not going to pay rent. He's not going to probably be housed unless he gets help. So, our tiny homes will just be like a bedroom with a closet and a door that closes and a roof and a pillow on their bed and a place for them to lock their valuables so they don't get things stolen. Another question was about neighborhoods, and I think of Bull telling me, Bull Cheney runs 5 clean and sober programs now, and they'll rent a house in town, they'll move into the neighborhood, And at first, people are like, oh my God, there's felons living next door to me. And a couple months later, they're knocking on the door saying, can Stan come over and cut our grass today? Because they're normal folk, and they're just there trying to make it like the best of us. Hi, Dawn. We thank Dawn Ortiz, Leg Supervisor, for coming tonight. Somebody asked a question about Section 8 voucher, but it's not really pertaining to tiny houses yet, because these are going to be pretty low budget. You know, Chuck shows some pretty fancy co-housing places. Ours are going to be much lower scale. Carly and I went to, there you are, the Community First Village. Bull and I went to the Community First Village, and theirs is just phenomenal. They've got acres and acres of beautiful tiny homes, and they brought in all these architects from all over the world and did this, you know, contest to see who could put up the most beautiful tiny homes. They didn't even use the word security. They didn't need it because everybody knew what was expected of them. Okay, I think we've had enough questions. We wanted to also say that if you want to support Hope's Village, buy a t-shirt. We've got t-shirts on sale tonight. If we don't have your email address, please leave it for us. Please tell us how you want to help with the village. I thank you all for coming. I'm so grateful. We're all so grateful. Thank you. Go ahead.
And just one more parting note, we want to thank Mountain Brook Church for donating their facilities. Thank you so much. We also want to thank Becky Jordan, not just for inviting Chuck here to help us with our tiny home village, not just for promoting and putting on this event, but for her tireless effort to bring a tiny home village to our community of San Luis Obispo.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm appreciative.
There is an Easter basket in the back of the room. I hope you will contribute.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Hey, I did mention that we would go for an iced tea at the Granada afterwards. Anybody who wants to brainstorm next steps, I'm happy to. The Granada, it's on Morrow. I think it's on Morrow, between Higuera and Marsh, I believe. Yeah. Howdy. Did you go to Cal Poly?
She was just a girl, she expected the world, but it flew away from her reach, so she ran away in her sleep and dreamed of paradise, paradise. Every time she closed